Our first speaker is Mike Steele. Mike is well known to many of you, professor in the Department of Animal Biosciences at OAC. He's known particularly for his calf research as well as other aspects of applied nutrition and metabolism. And so Mike's going to kick things off talking about new approaches for feeding dairy and dairy beef calves. Welcome, Mike.
Great. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to be talking about some of the research that we're doing in our lab, so it will just be more of the new stuff that we've been reporting over the last 3 to 4 years. We're about to report. I'm very fortunate to come to Guelph. I came to Guelph 7 years ago. This is one of our pictures about 2 years into the program of calf research, and it's really exciting to be with this critical mass of calf researchers. It's always been fun working with Dave Renaud. And I think, and also Charlotte Winder, Trevor DeVries, there's so many other people doing calf research with our team. And we're consistently publishing over 40 papers a year. And I'm really, really proud of everything that's been developing out of this. And even some of the players in here are now professors in the universities around the world. So it's really cool what's evolved. So what our lab consistently has been studying for the last 10 years is this idea of early life programming. So I think of a calf as a ball rolling down a hill, and depending on how you manage this animal will ultimately impact the future phenotype, okay? So we've been studying a lot with respect to colostrum, a little bit of prenatal, but mainly around this milk and weaning center. Now I wanna look at this concept a little bit more deeply before I get into my presentation. So there's lots of opportunity in the calf world to do prenatal work. Not a lot has been done. I think other species where this developmental plasticity or this opportunity to change the future phenotype is always greater, but not a lot of research in the dairy world, lots in the beef world though. But most calf research is during this pre-weaning period. And as the heifer eventually matures into a cow, your developmental plasticity will decrease. So when you're older, let's say like Dave Kelton, okay, there's no changing Dave Kelton. The only plasticity he has is plastic surgery, and he's not that kind of guy, in my opinion. At least that's what I think. Okay, sorry, Dave. I don't even know where you are, but I saw that you're here. Anyways, so this is a concept that I want you to be aware of. And I want you to choose, basically, based on the feedback, I want you to tell me what I should present. So I go around and people complain that I present the same thing. So this is all up to you. Okay? So what do you want to hear based on your reactions? Prenatal. That's dead silent. Okay. All right. So I got the feedback. You don't want to hear prenatal. Okay. Colostrum. Okay. We got some colostrum here. Okay. Milk.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Good. Because I have some exciting slides about that. Weaning. I think colostrum milk might be weaning, but weaning's third. Dairy beef. Okay. All right. All right. We got it. There's one more. I'm not sure if I'm mentally prepared to get into it, but it's what is it like to collaborate with Dave Renaud? So that's a fun. I'll think about this through the course of the presentation. I'm not sure. It's a very dark place, and I'm not sure if I feel comfortable enough to get into that today. But we'll see. We'll see how this presentation evolves. So colostrum, okay, milk, and then also dairy beef. So yeah, colostrum is very exciting. We've been studying colostrum actually since day one when I started to be a professor. And it's really fascinating because it's not just all about immunoglobulins. There's so many other different components that we've been trying to study a lot. So we've been focusing more so on the carbohydrate fractions, or we call them oligosaccharides, and also fats. But we have recently been kind of taking steps back and trying to figure out how colostrum is actually formed. Now, we actually don't know how colostrum is formed. We call this colostrogenesis. There's so many different factors. We know that parity has a big influence. We know that season, dry period length, calf sex as well, previous 305-day milk. There looks like nutrition may, although there's a lot of conflicting results depending on the study, can impact this. So there's many different factors that can modify it, but we really don't know how this works. So I'm very fortunate at the University of Guelph. I've always had very talented PhDs and students. They're all smarter than I am. That's one of my criteria for selection. And one of them is Dr. Amanda Fisher-Tolusto, who just graduated from our lab in September. So she's always been really fascinated in this question, because we are missing this fundamental information regarding the process of how colostrogenesis occurs. So I go, yeah, that's really smart. She's so smart all the time. Can you maybe make an analogy? And she has this analogy that she always has is, Mike, okay, it's like we've got a house, all the wiring is there. We just don't know how to turn on the lights. So I think that this is a very good analogy, and this is what she's been focusing on. And she's teamed up with other students in my lab. So another student, Kaylee Klein, who's doing her PhD, and Julia, who just finished her MSc. And they did a really intensive study at the ODRC, the Ontario Dairy Research Centre, otherwise known as Elora Dairy, collecting milk from every single quarters or colostrum. We did biopsies, we did ultrasound to look at mammary blood flow, things of this nature. Here's some biopsies, and here's some secretions as well that we were collecting. So a very intensive study because, yeah, we have studies showing how dietary interventions or different management strategies can impact it, but we're really just guessing about the mechanisms because we don't understand enough about colostrogenesis. So here's some of the preliminary graphs, and this comes from Amanda's PhD. Just looking at serum IgG here in the red, and then this is the secretions that we were collecting from our cows prepartum, just showing you that IgG is actually a lot higher here about a week before the cow gives birth. But it is inclining here even up to 5-6 weeks, it's continually increasing. So lots of decrease within the blood. We don't know if this IgG in the cow's blood is actually ending up within the cow's alveoli or the colostrum. That's still to be determined. A lot of people think it does. But we notice that it peaks about a week before, but it's continually increasing even weeks before this cow gives birth. And then it goes down, presumably through dilution with lactose. Anyways, there's also this increase of 91% from 6 weeks before parturition all the way up to 1 week before. So this is a mammary tissue 1 week before the cow gives birth, and you can see we stain this in red for IgG, and it's completely lit up, okay? So there's huge stores with IgG, it's all there, even a week in advance. So we know a lot of these factors with respect to colostrogenesis of IgG are happening before this last week of parturition, but other factors that we looked at, or other bioactive factors such as oligosaccharides, so they're the natural prebiotics that this cow produces, do not increase until the last week, right before parturition. So all these bioactives have a purpose, but they're all being increased at different time points prepartum. So I think the more we learn about this, the more that we can somehow learn how to manipulate this more to increase a lot of these very healthful bioactive factors. We've also have been doing just studies on the tissue that we collected from these cows too. So this is just looking at the structure of the tissue. The alveolar size doesn't really increase until parturition, as well as the number of mammary epithelial cells per alveolar. It's not really increasing until that day of parturition. And the structure, really not a lot of changes until day 0 and +7 here. And then with respect to cell proliferation or growth, it's slowing down as soon as this cow gives birth, but we do have this increase right about 7 days before parturition, as you can see here. So this is really good. We understand that although we don't see the structural differences, these cells are still growing, and also their apoptosis, or their cell death, is decreasing through the dry cow period. So this is all work from the same study, just showing us when these cellular pathways are being turned on and off. We also have some molecular pathways we're looking into as well. But it looks like if we just look at the high-level structure, we're really missing a lot of these biological mechanisms that we can probe and potentially manipulate to improve colostrum quantity and quality in the future. Other really interesting findings, and these are all papers that will be submitted in 2026, is that they also looked at mammary plasma flow, okay? So we can actually assess using ultrasound how much blood is going to the mammary gland in this flow and calculate that rate. What's really interesting is that there isn't a true increase until parturition, but there is a period here which is very interesting to look at. And it shows that if you have mammary blood flow, it can be higher in cows, and they use actually more acetate, which is what the mammary gland is using, and more glucose as well. If they do that right around this period of -8, -6, and they're not really shutting down their mammary gland, there's some indication that they produce less colostrum volume. So this is kind of interesting, more evidence that things that are happening even before this cow is really in a true dry period where these cells are shut off, that could potentially be impacting things right here with respect to colostrogenesis. So interesting findings. I'm so happy that these students did this study. It was a lot of work, and we couldn't have done it without our Dairy Research Center in being able to actually do this work. So we've also looked at colostrum basics a lot. And here's some of the key recommendations that I think that we're challenging right now. There's two that really jump out at me that I think need to be updated. And of course, we need to clean colostrum. We can pasteurize it. We should be feeding colostrum, I think, as close to 1 hour as possible. I think that's, everyone agrees on that. But I think the quality and quantity we should be revisiting. And I would recommend even increasing from 22 bricks to a 25 bricks, and from 50 grams all the way to 70 grams as our criteria. I think that we have cows that can do this. We're learning more about how we can actually manipulate this, but I think this is the new way of looking at feeding colostrum, is feeding a lot higher quality and not just accepting 22 and 50 gram per liter. And then quantity, 10% in the first 12 hours, I think we can update that. I think we can feel very comfortable going up to 12% in 2 meals, okay? So 8% and 4% of birth body weight. I think that we can all agree in the literature that that looks like it's a suitable amount, although there's a lot of controversy in that topic at this point in our industry. But this is why we do research. So in this study, this is a recent study that I collaborated with Sabina Mann, who led this study at Cornell University. So we do compete against Cornell as well, but yeah, the good ones we'll collaborate with. And Sabina Mann is, I think, one of the best ones there. But anyways, we looked at the different percentages of 6, 8, 10, and 12% of the first meal of colostrum. And just looking at IgG, there is a benefit. It appears to be feeding more up to 12%. Yes, you will get this increase compared to the 8% as well as the 6%. But really, it looks like around here is pretty suitable with respect to IgG. These are very, very high levels of IgG in circulation of these calves. But the AEA, the more that you feed in this particular study with respect to volume, it does go down. So it does look that, in the AEA stands for apparent efficiency of absorption, so how much of this IgG ends up in circulation. So it does go down, but it looks like that this 8 to 10% is kind of a sweet spot. You don't want to go too much. It looks like there's some discomfort. The cows were actually kicking at their bellies a little bit more at 12% in this study, but it looks like somewhere between 8 and 10% is where we should be. Now we're going to be looking at what is a second meal. Should the second meal be 4%? Should it be even higher? That's some of the research we'd like to be doing next year, and we're starting to plan those studies for the spring and summer. So kind of interesting data. And I think that 8 to 10% is where we should be with respect to that data, at least my interpretation of that data. We also look at colostrum quality a lot, and this is maternal colostrum that we're looking at here. So we fed in this particular study 30 grams of maternal colostrum IgG, 60 gram and 90 gram here, all maternal. And it's really interesting because our apparent efficiency of absorptions in this study were actually the same. So these calves were actually receiving 350 grams of IgG in this particular treatment here, and we can still keep on elevating the amount of IgG that we see in circulation. But the question I receive from farmers a lot is, what if I don't have good colostrum? What can I do? So in this study, we enriched the 30 grams to 60 grams and using a dried colostrum source. And the source that we used was from the SCCL company. And in this particular case, it did increase the amount of IgG in circulation when we did that. However, when we enriched the 60 gram to 90 gram, we didn't have this elevation. Yes, numerical, maybe there's something else within the colostrum that could have had a benefit we just looked at IgG, but it appears like there's not a benefit when you already have pretty good colostrum trying to enrich it with respect to IgG levels. So I think enriching low quality colostrum based on some of this research is to your advantage. So I think feeding as much IgG as possible, especially if you have this low quality colostrum, is really important. But it really made me think more about our recommendations with dairy animals too. Because not that long ago, we were actually saying a dairy calf should fed 100 grams of IgG. That was about 20 years ago. Then we moved to about 200 grams of IgG in that first meal. That was about 10 years ago. Now we're talking about 300 right now. So I think that we should continually increase. I think most cows produce around 400, 500 grams of IgG within their first milking. So perhaps getting it closer to these values. I don't like to admit this in front of a dairy group, but I do beef research from time to time. I can't resist this research center that we have. It's totally amazing. And we do milk these beef animals. Shockingly, they're more tame than a 2-year-old Holstein. However, we do give them oxytocin, so maybe that has something to do with it in these studies. But what was really fascinating, and I'm not going to go into the results of some of these studies, but just looking at the IgG levels of cows and calves together, we actually didn't have a calf under 40 grams of IgG at 24, 48 hours after receiving colostrum. So you don't see these numbers in the dairy world. We did studies feeding 5 gram, 2.5 grams, so very small levels of IgG. And this is typically what they're receiving in nature, around 250 to 500 grams total in these treatments. But really, there's a big difference from what we see in actual nature and what's actually happening on farms. Now, these are quite a bit lower with respect to AEAs compared to normal, but this is happening all the time on farms, is that we're just not feeding enough colostrum. I think the quality and the quantity really needs to be focused on. And then I think this graph just really opens up your eyes to what actually happens if we actually could have a calf nursed from a cow. So lots to do there, and we plan on doing another round of colostrum research. We just finished a 5-year NSERC grant, and we plan to do another 4 years of colostrum research starting in 2026. Another area that I'm just going to focus on briefly is we also use colostrum outside the first day of life. And we've been looking at using it for a treatment of diarrhea. Dave Renaud will talk about that towards the end of the day. But we also like this extended colostrum feeding, and it just kind of mimics what the cow naturally does, is producing this transition milk, which is full of goodies. But largely we don't really feed it sometimes just because we're so focused on IgG. So we did this study on a commercial farm where we fed 2 colostrum meals. We fed a colostrum replacer in this study. And we had one group switch to a milk replacer. One group, we had a transition of 50-50 colostrum and milk replacer for 2 days after the colostrum. Then they got milk replacer. And then another group just received 10% of their meal as colostrum replacer for the first 14 days of life. And then another group that was kind of like the super max, the 50-50, as well as this 10%. So we thought that obviously the more colostrum that you feed, the better it will be for the animal, but this is why we do research on commercial farms. This farm was having a disease outbreak at the time. A lot of the cows were getting sick, obviously, as you can see from the odds of remaining healthy, but these 3 treatments with the extended colostrum feeding, they got their first illness later on in life. And the survivability, there was a Salmonella Dublin outbreak during the time of this study, was better in all 3 of these treatments compared to the control treatment. So it looks like, and there's other studies showing very similar things, that if we feed colostrum or different types of nutrients in this first week or 2 of life, we can have accelerated growth sometimes, we can have more development, we can have less health outcomes that are showing up in our research. And we're calling this concept phase feeding, which is everywhere in the swine industry. In poultry industry, it's very common knowledge, but it's a new term that we're floating around. Not to be confused with precision feeding, which is another way of basically using sensor technology to deliver different products. So, for example, the diarrhea treatments that we've been using colostrum for, that would be more precision feeding. So based on alarms from sensor technology in a feeder, we can determine if a calf is going down in drinking speed or overall intake, then we can deliver this. So Kristen Edwards did really nice research. This was on a commercial farm. It was a really abrupt weaning off high milk in this particular study, but she added colostrum during the step down, in just a very small amount, actually 125 grams per day. Not that much. And it actually had a pretty big impact after weaning on growth. So it looks like potentially you have a lot of gut health issues during weaning. Maybe this colostrum is speeding up the recovery of the gut, and these animals can actually grow more. So difference is close to 3 kg just a couple weeks after, which is a pretty big difference. So Kristen Edwards is a new professor that just joined our Department of Population Medicine. It's a very strong background in veterinary medicine, is doing dairy and beef work here at the University of Guelph. So that's it. I think we need to change topics now. So I heard some milk screams from Giselle. She seemed very excited about milk, so let's go to milk, if that's all right. We got to deliver what Giselle wants, okay? So milk feeding is something I've been studying forever, and I'm really fascinated with feeding higher levels of milk without transport in early life, okay? If you have transport in early life, it's a different ballgame. You have to eventually ramp them up on milk. But I think even in the first week of life, and these calves are 4 days old there in this particular video, they're consuming 10 liters of milk. So if you feed more milk, especially in early life, so this is just a simple study, 5 versus 10 liters of pasteurized milk, they're gonna grow more, okay? More nutrients when they don't eat starter. They don't eat significant amounts of starter in the first 3 weeks of life to contribute to growth. So if you don't deliver the milk, you're not gonna have the growth. This is shockingly a concept that we've been debating for the last 50 years in dairy nutrition, but I think it's pretty straightforward. If you want more growth, if that's your objective, you need to feed more milk. So we've been studying more about the long-term consequences because we all know that average daily gain is associated with lifetime milk production. So we want to learn more about this. So we partnered from a study from Cornell University. Again, we are open to collaboration. We will just beat you at ADSA, okay? That's the way we operate. So this is with Mike Van Eberg. And this is a very simple study comparing high levels of milk versus low. And here's the organ masses from this study. So if you feed higher levels of milk close to an ad libitum, you're gonna have a higher liver, okay? So even as a percentage of body weight, it is still significant. You have a bigger kidney. But what's really intriguing and what people think is really the mechanism behind all this is that the mammary gland is growing allometrically during this stage. And as you can see, the overall mass is a lot larger. And the parenchyma tissue, so these are the cells that are gonna eventually produce the milk, are even larger with respect to a proportion here. So you are actually adding quite a bit of fat to the fat pad of the mammary gland, but you're getting a lot of parenchyma tissue. And this is still a hypothesis. This is what people think might be related to this. Still a hypothesis. So we took this tissue and we did a bunch of gene expression and we developed a lot more hypotheses. And we focused on the fat and mammary gland because they were the most bioactive here. So we published some papers in this area, just basically trying to give us more pointers in how this could be affecting the animal early in life. But again, this is from dissection data right before weaning. And this is the biggest problem in calf research is that we don't follow animals for a long time. And we're quite limited with our interpretations because I could do everything I want in 60 days, but does it have an impact of the cow? We don't really know sometimes. So this is a study that was in ideation 15 years ago. This was before I was an academic, and this is something we planned. This was done in the Netherlands where we fed 8 liters of milk at 150 gram per liter versus 4. And we fed this to initially 50 calves per treatment. So a lot of these studies are retrospective, looking at associations. So we actually had a treatment from the beginning. And we did it on one commercial farm just outside of Boxmeer in the Netherlands. And it was in collaboration with Trout Nutrition because I was currently working for Trout Nutrition when we were designing this study. So feed more milk, the calves grow more, okay? But also their metabolome is completely different. So the metabolome right before these treatments is of course similar, but just at day 49 after receiving high and low milk, we have really big differences in energy metabolism, protein metabolism, and also liver changes. So we're getting a whole bunch of metabolites being turned on and off, and this persists even as heifers as well as lactating cows. Even their insulin sensitivity with the glucose tolerance tests we were doing were still different in these animals as they aged. So it looks like this early life treatment had some physiological differences. I know, I show this to farmers and they say, we don't care about this, we want to see the milk production data. So yes, here's the milk production data from the first lactation. So they actually produced more fat. Their feed conversion was lower though, but their fat was higher, okay? And this continued as you went to the second lactation here, where their actual fat-corrected milk was a lot higher, and actually their feed efficiency was also higher at that time point too, and their overall fat. So this continued even in the third lactation, there was an increase in fat as well. So it's quite interesting that something that we're doing in early life can have an impact. But I think the most interesting results, and let's keep them with a grain of salt because we did have limited numbers of animals here, but the survivability of these animals fed elevated planes of milk nutrition was higher in this particular study. So it was a commercial farm. It was up to them when they were culling. They didn't know any of the treatments. So this is just some of the natural data that was produced through this entire study in addition to the milk production data. But I think very telling. Now it's really risky to do these studies. It took us over 10 years to complete this study. I can't really go to DFO and say, hey, Robert, give me a couple $1 million and I'll report back in 2035. I can only imagine what the board would say, okay? But we still need to strive to do these studies. They're really hard to do, but I think a very big limitation. And we've been doing a lot of these studies in the Netherlands, and we have a lot of students there. Here's 2 students. One's graduated a year and a half ago, Juliette Wilms, and she works for Trow Nutrition as a scientist, as well as Juanita Echeverria Manera, who's currently completing her PhD, who's a DFO scholar. So one of the last DFO scholars is Juanita. So she's finishing her PhD this year, but she lives full-time in the Netherlands right now as she's going to be a research scientist for them. But they've been not just looking at total amount of milk fed, they've been really focused on the actual composition, which is really interesting. Because when you really compare milk and milk replacer, and I'm just looking at milk replacer on average. Not all these milk replacers are like this, but on average, they're about 50% of the fat compared to what you would have in whole milk in a lot of cases, okay? Also, the lactose is a lot higher, okay? It's probably the ingredients we're putting in, whey permeates, they're going in, probably something to do with that. Of course, the ash is also higher too because we have a lot of byproducts, okay? But the osmoles will also be higher in a milk replacer compared to whole milk. Now, I'm not against milk replacers here. In fact, I recommend milk replacers on certain farms if I think it makes sense. I'm not anti-milk replacer, but I think we need to acknowledge that we have these big differences here. And work by Juliette Wilms has shown that if you increase the hypertonic nature of a milk replacer, it will increase gut permeability. So if you feed more lactose or sugars, you're going to open up the gut. And also, high lactose milk replacers impacts insulin sensitivity as well, and we'll get to that data. So they did studies looking at ad libitum actual feeding of these milk replacers, so a high fat. That's actually not even close to a whole milk. A whole milk would be over 30%, but we're trying to get up there. And then the high lactose. And what any kind of calf researcher would say is that these calves aren't going to be eating enough starter if they're being fed high fat. So what we found is that that's actually not the case in this particular study. There was no differences in starter intake. They did actually consume more milk because they have a lower energy density, okay? If you correct for energy, and you look at metabolizable energy intake, there's actually no differences. So it's kind of cool how the calf can actually regulate its total energy intake. And another thing that we were told is that your calves on high fat are not going to grow very well. And this wasn't the case as we can see from these. 12 weeks at 120 kg is a really big calf. And also some of these average daily gains are really high and kind of unprecedented in Journal of Dairy Science of above 1. That's very rare to see. So I think that that's certainly not the case, and I think that we need to update this. Also, we did other studies looking at controlled feeding levels, so not ad libitum, but still elevated levels, but just in the first week of life. And it does affect insulin sensitivity. We'd like to follow this for later on, but it does reduce insulin sensitivity when we had this higher level of lactose going into a milk replacer. Again, this is only in the first week of life, but what does this mean later on? Does this affect the cow during the transition period? I don't think we really know. So we know that this is affecting not only insulin sensitivity, but even how the meal actually moves from the abomasum to the small intestine. Then also the physiology of this animal is totally different. In this study, the high-fat calves receiving this high-fat milk replacer actually gain more in that first week, which is contrary to everything that's really published in the literature when you look at the entire pre-weaning period. So different results there. Also, like their physiology, their liver weight is totally different too. Okay, if you dissect everything and you look at the genes or the metabolites in every single organ, they're going to be different. Even if they have similar average daily gain, it looks like in a lot of these comparisons, so we've been looking at many different comparisons. We've been looking at comparisons of high fat versus whole milk, high lactose versus milk, and high protein versus milk. It looks like even if their average daily gains are very similar, you have a completely different phenotype in this animal, or we call it a metabolic fingerprint. They're totally different. So we're trying to study what does that actually mean? Maybe it doesn't mean anything. That is possible. But we're wondering, okay, they have similar average daily gains. Does this affect their physiology at least later on in life? So we've been following animals during the pre-weaning period, but we also try to follow them as heifers as well. This is one study versus milk replacer and whole milk, which was the same macronutrient composition. And what we noted here is that the calves fed the whole milk treatment. So this was a dried whole milk, the exact same composition of fat and protein and lactose. They actually had a lot more forestomach and also some small intestinal weight and also some surface area of absorption. So their villi were a lot more developed when they were receiving this whole milk versus a milk replacer. And also their composition of tissue with respect to fatty acids was completely different as well. And when you look at it and you compare not just the amount of fat within a milk replacer, but the fatty acid composition of it, you'll notice that it's quite different. And what we've been focusing on a lot is C4, C6, so these short and medium chain fatty acids, which aren't in a lot of milk replacers. So we wanted to add them to a milk replacer and see what happened. So what we did is we had ad libitum feeding of a milk replacer, one control, then one with a C4, C6, and this was done by Juliette Wilms. This was all done in the Netherlands. And we noted that these calves, contrary to what you would think, actually consume more milk. And actually these calves, which goes against every single rule that you would see within a textbook of calf nutrition, with higher milk, consumed higher starter. So that's never really been reported. And I think it's largely because the actual rumen as well as their gastrointestinal tract is more developed. So we actually looked at the development of these polyps within the rumen. These animals were only 3 to 4 weeks old when we were dissecting. So we were actually counting the structure of these polyp-like structures within the rumen. This is what a polyp looks like. We classified them. And what we found is that these animals that were fed the C4, C6 treatment had a lot more polyp development within their rumens. And this is interesting because we're delivering something to the small intestine and it's actually affecting the development of the rumen. Okay? So it's pretty cool that that can happen. So this is a kind of interesting, it kind of shows, and it's a branch of research we've been working on, is matching milk feeding and the composition, the amount we feed with the starter. Okay? I think it's time to change topics now, okay? Getting a lot of intensity dwindling away. So let's, the largest cheer of the day, and I heard it from Guy, okay? It was dairy beef. So let's deliver Guy what Guy wants, okay? Okay, same with you, Robert, okay? This is for you. I'm gonna dedicate this section to you. So let's do a little bit, you got me for at least another 15 minutes, so let's spend about 10, 15 minutes on this topic. It's something that I'm really focused on with Dave Renault. We've just started, we have a 5-year NSERC grant with DFO, CMEX, as well as TROW, BFO, VFO as well, other organizations, NSERC, OMAFA. So it's really great. BCRC as well, BFO, are also contributing to these projects. But it's really fascinating, and it's exactly what I wanted. It came at the perfect time because I still want to study early life programming and how that affects the animal later on in life. But I don't have enough guts to do these studies that last 10 years. So in the dairy beef world, we were slaughtering them right after 1 year. So we can actually study how early life interventions can impact their phenotype at maturity of harvest. But it's really emerging too, as we all know. So here's some recent numbers from Canada. This is a review that's in the Journal of Dairy Science that's still in the review process, but just showing you the different percentages and how things have been changing. So this is from market calves. Crossbreds are now at 60% of the total calves at market. And not that long ago, 10 years ago, it was around 5-7%. So this is changing really quickly. What else is changing really quickly, and much to the chagrin of doing research sometimes, is the price of these animals is dramatically increasing. So there's also rumors that calves are receiving $2,500 for newborn calves right now. There's some weaned animals being sold for over $3,000. So these are massive numbers that are unprecedented, and they're historic, okay? I think we need to acknowledge that. They're historic, but also what is historic is the price of beef right now, because our cow-calf operations, our cow numbers are dwindling. So our production is very different with respect to conventional beef production and dairy beef production. I would say these dairy beef calves, and I say dairy beef in the sense that also includes cull cows. So that's under the definition of dairy beef. Crossbreds or beef on dairy are a part of the dairy beef, as well as Holsteins as well that are purebred. But basically the entire industry, as well as the veal industry, sometimes can be very segmented, where you have a nursery, a grower, possibly a backgrounder, but most likely it's going to a feedlot and then an abattoir. So their life is very different. They're weaned and fed completely different. Here's just a contrast of a dairy beef animal versus a conventional. So they're ad libitum milk in dairy in an actual conventional beef operation. They have transition milk, they have whole milk. They're weaned at 6 to 8 months. This is a big difference from a dairy beef animal or a beef on dairy animal, where they're not fed that much colostrum. They're fed a little bit of milk replacer. They immediately go on to solid feed around 2 months of age, okay? So there's a big difference. We're replacing the lactose from milk with starch from our feed sources. So this is a big difference. This is why people think liver abscesses are higher, is because we're feeding so much starch to these animals. But on top of this, and something that we'd never discuss, and there's just an experiment wrapping up at our research unit at Ponsonby about this, is the massive amount of transportation in the dairy beef sector. The most noteworthy would be in the first week. That's a game changer for a calf. We only transport an hour and a half from our purchaser, and that's still extremely stressful. So some of these animals, in particular in the US and some parts of Europe, are on transports for over 24 hours easily, some of them even up to 48 in certain countries. Thankfully, we're reducing that in Canada. We have tighter regulations, but even a short transport is really stressful, and we have to manage them differently. So a lot going on here. So that's why you have to have keen grad students. We started our dairy beef research program when I was in the Netherlands on sabbatical. So these students are really tough. Hannah McCarthy, who's also a manager at OCC as well. Titouan Chapelain, who's been one of the first PhD students in this. And Melinda, who thankfully converted from a master's degree, just graduated and is starting her PhD and is focused on dairy beef and crossbred work too. So I'm very lucky, and they're really tough because they started these experiments, which are very challenging to do, when I was on sabbatical in Europe. So I really am very thankful for their hard work. But there's lots of data that we're generating right now. I'm just going to focus on some of the key takeaways. Melinda, this is a paper in review that she's just submitted, looking at the differences of Holstein and crossbred. This was done in collaboration with Mapleview and their data sets. And basically, they grow more, okay? They grow more throughout the entire rearing period, but this pre-weaning period, you can differentiate their growth already. And also their average daily gain is higher during this pre-weaning period. So this is looking at records from hundreds of animals as well. So crossbred calves have higher body weight and average daily gain. What I think is most important, especially with the amount of antibiotics that are being used in every single calf industry, the replacement, but especially the dairy beef or the male calves or even anything destined for the beef industry, we are overusing antibiotics, and it's one of the major sources of antibiotics in livestock production. So what's really intriguing, and this is again research from Melinda, showing that the days of diarrhea, when they go through this diarrhea bout, which they will after transport and changing their environment, it's almost guaranteed, is a lot shorter. That's duration. As well as the days to first fecal score, they're a little bit older when they get that first insult of diarrhea. Respiratory, not a big difference here in the overall incidence. But what was also interesting in Melinda's thesis is to look at the treatments, okay? So Holsteins had a higher hazard of receiving a single antibiotic treatment for diarrhea and the second and third treatment for BRD. So we're not having differences in the overall amounts of BRD, but the treatments of BRD, especially that second and third treatment, were significantly lower in the crossbred calves. So that's a good story to promote. But that's great. We're still caught in the same pattern where we're only looking at pre-weaning, and we should really eventually increase this. So we started some studies. This is the first part of the study where we looked at colostrum feeding. And then I had the wild idea, hey, why don't we follow these animals for their entire life? Much to, I'm sure, the chagrin of my students, but we did it. And this is just the results from the first days of life, the first 14, looking at feeding high levels of colostrum and low levels of colostrum, with different breeds as well. So there wasn't a big difference except this lower group. These Holsteins didn't absorb, when we're feeding lower levels, as much IgG. So just a moderate difference, but higher levels, no difference. Lower levels, there was a difference. And the apparent efficiency of absorption was just a little bit better in these crossbreds when you're feeding a lower amount. So that was quite interesting, that result. We also follow these animals for a lot longer. Here's some of the average daily gains. So we're getting like really high levels of average daily gains. This is in pounds, but in this particular study, we were averaging over 2 kg of growth in the post-weaning period. Yes, they were receiving implants, traditional implants. That definitely helps, 100%. But we were actually getting to maturity in these animals. We're reaching levels of intramuscular fat that are ideal for harvest really early in life. So 12, 13 months, they were already over and approaching 700 kg. We actually had some of them over 700 kg at 12 months of life. On average, it was around 600, 650. So reaching that maturity very early in life. We didn't find a lot of liver abscesses. Actually, you can count them all on one hand. So I'm not really sure. Probably it's the age that we're slaughtering is quite early, but they are reaching maturity. And their intramuscular fat is also at a good level. So we're getting good grades out of these animals even in early life. But I still think we need to do some more data mining and some more experimentation on the proper slaughter date, because this is dramatically younger compared to what you would report in a conventional beef system. So I think breed and early life nutrition can impact growth and marbling. I won't get into actual marbling data, but we're lucky to have an abattoir at the University of Guelph where we can take a little bit deeper look at the actual meat science aspect of this. And we can also calculate feed conversion for their entire life. Okay, so this is really powerful what we have at the University of Guelph, where we can actually measure feed intake every single day of this animal's life. That's really incredible. It really differentiates our actual research. So we're about to submit a lot of these first rounds of papers. Some of them have already been submitted from this study, about 2 of them, but we're still continually developing them. And we're diving deeper into the meat science aspect of this research. Now, I must admit, there's a huge advantages to studying meat science. I didn't know why all these beef scientists were so happy all the time until I started to do meat science work. And then you can have barbecues all the time. And then a lot of people, your students from countries like Argentina and Brazil can teach you how to properly prepare meat. So it's been a very positive experience, not only doing research in dairy beef, because it's really fun, but also this aspect is quite good. And I must give kudos to some of the people even in this room. Lucille, where are you? He's one of the best people at barbecuing in this room, hands down. I think that you are also very good, Lucia. So if your name sounds like that, Lucio, like you're pretty much set. You know how to barbecue like a champion. And they're at different levels than Canadians, and that's what I've learned from them. And I'm very thankful. And it's amazing what we have. Sorry, I just wanted a close up there. I invited you, but you didn't respond, Guy. Sorry. So I didn't take it personally, but now I will. Anyways, we're interested in this idea of how we can change meat from early life. And this really comes, Marcio Duarte was a professor in our department. He did a lot of prenatal work showing that you can affect meat quality later on in life. But we're really interested in how we can make animals marble more, okay? And this marbling window is happening in early life. So we think the amount that we feed them and the composition of the feed can actually have a long-term response in these animals. So here's the main marbling window. So we can actually get the animal at the rearing, the pre-weaning period, and actually possibly make an impact on their carcass quality based on how we're feeding. And it's actually perfect because we can manipulate them more during this pre-weaning and also post-weaning period, all the way up to about 8 months based on dietary interventions. And then the conventional beef sector does not have that opportunity because the calf is with the cow. So I think there's more opportunities for interventions to affect some of these phenotypes. So we did an experiment that just wrapped up. Melinda was also involved, also my PhD student, Titouan, where they looked at composition. So they looked at high lactose versus high fat milk replacers. And then these animals were also fed either a control starter, which was pretty much a normal high starch starter and grower, and then a fat supplemented one, so 7% crude fat. So we're feeding quite a bit of fat in that particular treatment, pre-weaning as well as post-weaning, and they were on these diets until 8 months of life. And then the fat milk replacer, same thing, a control starter as well as a fat supplemented starter. So what we found is that this pre-weaning period, yes, we did have some slight differences in intake, but and also some of the actual growth was a little bit different. But really where it was really differentiating was that dry feed diet. They were actually growing a lot more on the one that was higher in starch and lower in fat, okay? I thought their actual intake would be the same with respect to energy. I think it is, but their overall just dry matter intake was a lot larger on the ones that was higher starch. So kind of an interesting find. We're still going through this data. Now we're looking at the composition of the meats with respect to this, and just some preliminary data here. So this is a big difference actually. So solid feed intake actually had a pretty big difference in overall growth and body weight here in this particular study. But when you look at the physiology of the animal, we can look at ribeye area. Not a lot of differences here. It looks like basically this high lactose, even the control, so higher carbohydrates, looks like it could potentially be increasing ribeye area. So some of the recommendations that we potentially have for replacement animals might not be the case for actual dairy beef animals. Subcutaneous fat, it looks like maybe there's something going on with this high lactose as well as high starch diet. And then intramuscular fat, it looks like, yeah, something's going on with these group with respect to the high lactose and the control diet, having more intramuscular fat compared to the calves that had the high lactose as well as the fat for the post-weaning diet or for the solid feed diet. So lots that we need to dive deeper into, but I just wanted to give everyone a taste of kind of the direction we're moving with this particular research. We see a huge advantage because of the support from Canada, but also our research units are filling in a big void with respect to all the research because everyone's just looking at calves for the first 60 days or the finishing ration, and we don't even know how old these animals or how they were raised before. So with our research units, we can follow them from start to finish, which is really powerful. So we have early life data analysis that we're diving deep into, looking at health. We also have this colostrum and breed experiment that you'll read more about in the coming year. We also have this nutrient source study. We're just about on the finishing side of things with this high versus low milk study that we just did. These animals are around 8 months old right now, so we're slaughtering them early 2026. And we're also starting another study looking at post-weaning diets that will be starting in spring of 2026. And they just keep on coming. There appears to be a lot of demand for this type of research. And we're really fortunate. Here's some pictures of the new calf facility at Ponsonby. Here's a little video of it. So it's amazing that we have these types of facilities. This is kind of like the Taj Mahal for dairy beef calves here, though. You don't really see a lot of commercial environments, but like this, but it's pretty amazing what we have available. All automated feeders, as you can see from inside this calf kitchen. So with the amount of work that we're doing, it's really nice to have these kind of facilities where we can actually do this work and look at even behavioral components to it as well. So we can know how fast they're drinking, their suckling activity, things of this. And this pen that we're gonna scan to pretty soon was actually, this video is a little long here, but these calves were delivered that day. So that was just a couple hours after getting off the transport. So really a great environment. We're also attempting to look at green feed measurements of methane in this work. And it's really nice what we have where we can actually take 3-month-old calves and put it into our feedlot, and they actually stay there for their entire time until maturity. So very lucky, okay? So I'm glad that we had this time. I'm wrapping up right now and looking forward to your questions. Talking about colostrum, I think there's a lot going on there with respect to colostrogenesis, as well as how to feed that animal colostrum properly and other applications of it. Milk feeding, I think we need to start thinking about how milk feeding and starter are combined and they interact, and also the total amounts we still need to revisit. And dairy beef is really exploding right now. It's a very exciting topic. I'm sorry, I know that people really wanted to hear about my collaborations with Dave Renault. But it looks like we should spend the time on questions, and I will revisit this topic based on the enthusiasm I received at the beginning in my next presentation for Dairy at Guelph. Plus, he's not here because apparently he's teaching. Is that true? Can you validate that, Stephen? Okay, we'll take his word. You can challenge him this afternoon. But anyways, I'd like to thank our sponsors for this research as well. We do have a colostrum conference that I'm hosting at the University of Guelph. It's going to be May 20th to 22nd. We also have a producer day, May 23rd. So if you'd like to participate, I'm organizing that with Dr. Amanda Fisher-Touloustos. And also, we have an animal bioscience grad symposium December 9th. Okay, so if anyone's in Guelph, Dan Ganesh is helping us. Katie Wood is a big part of the committee. But basically, this allows our graduate students to present posters as well as orals. It starts at 9, goes to 4. So it's a big day. But to celebrate, we also have a graduate student career mixer, okay, and that's happening at the Bull Ring. And this allows the private industry to interact with our graduate students, which I think is really, really missing. We need to tie this a lot more, and this is our attempt to do so. So please register for this event. It's all free. I've been overwhelmed by the industry support that we received. I sent out 50 emails, and within a week, we have enough to run this, and it's really amazing. And it really shows that this connection really needs to take place, and there's a thirst for it. So I'm very happy to support these kind of initiatives. So with that, thank you for your attention. 50 minutes was pretty intense to start out. We got through it, but I'm looking forward to your questions.